In general, the cold season berries need frost to be palatable. Winter berries look ripe and tasty in September, but the birds don't touch them until after repeated frosts and thaws have raised the plant's natural sugars and lowered its bitterness and acidity. It's likely that beautyberries also get tastier after a frost or two. Now, robins aren't the only ones eating these two kinds of berries in our Missouri yard in November, but they're 95% of the traffic. Some winters, mockingbirds show up for the berries, but this wasn't one of the years. Various ground-feeding birds light in the winter berries, but of those smaller species, only the white-throated sparrows eat berries very often. In October, in fact, they ate more black chokeberries than anybody else in our yard, followed by cardinals, which is odd because both those species are seed eaters. Even odder is that the berry-loving robins, who supposedly adore chokeberries, basically ignored ours. It's not like they left town for the month of October. And that little mystery exemplifies a bigger puzzle. People who plant berrying bushes for the sake of birds are often mystified by what gets eaten, what doesn't, when it gets eaten, by whom not. These chokeberries, for example, looked beautiful the first couple of seasons after the bush was planted, but the berries might as well have been marbles for all the chance they had of being eaten back then. The plant needed time to mature. Next year will be season 7 for it. Maybe the robins will take more of an interest as it gets older. Or maybe they'll take more of an interest as our 2-year-old crabapple matures. Those berries look luscious, but see, that's what I'm talking about. The ones who could explain these anomalies don't speak human. Anyway, while I've been talking, might you have been noticing the way the whitethroats and cardinals eat a berry? They gouge out tiny bites and chew as if they were sewing machines stitching their food. I don't think I have any body parts that will move that rapidly. But that's what they need. As seed eaters, they crack open hulls by crushing them in those sharp 90-mile-an-hour beaks. And that's how they eat everything. They don't have the equipment to do this. That long, thin beak can grab a berry and show it off as if the bird were modeling. Other times, the robin simply makes a berry disappear so fast you're not sure he got it. Main reason you suspect he did is that you see the limb twitch. The beak is quicker than the eye. A robin can gulp berries like so many tiny sips of water. Grab, gulp, grab, gulp, grab, gulp. Doesn't look like he chews at all, which isn't a problem for him because he has an extra large esophagus. Downing a winter berry whole is no challenge. This bird can swallow a cherry, pit and all. And he figures, why not swallow it whole? He doesn't have much in the way of taste buds anyway, a 20th of what we do. Not enough for him to savor the flavor, just enough for him to know which berries to reject. So if his taste buds barely have time to wave hello as the food flies by them, that's okay with him. A thank you from his belly for filling it is all he requires. But for the most part, the robins prefer to pluck berries out of the bush. Now, they'll eat berries on the ground for sure. Those flighty sparrows knock so many of them off the bush, fleeing for cover every other minute, that the robins have to pick up after them. And foraging there has its advantages anyway, even if some of the berries are the wildlife version of liquefied raspberries in a trash can, because other berries are edible. And as long as the ground's not frozen, you never know what else you might find. You wouldn't want to walk away and leave a treat like that for the blue jays. And robins have enough in the way of taste buds and eyesight to know which berries to reject. Spitting out the hinky ones is part of their eating routine. Despite all the rotten berries he has to overlook, the robin knows that eating on the ground is still an easier way to gather food, then bouncing around in a shrub where the berries have gotten sparse. In a near-naked bush, a bird has to be a bungee jumper, a tightrope artist, a jack-in-the-box. So it's impressive that a goodly portion of the robins do put out that extra effort for a fruit they'll barely taste anyway. They're over here stretching and fluttering limb to limb to reach the few available berries, when across the yard the fruit is plentiful. And they've been eating there too, but they prefer this almost empty bush. And that's because berry-loving birds, even without close-packed taste buds, can tell important differences between what we'd call identical food sources. To a robin, it's not winter berries, more winter berries, and some other winter berries. It's winter berries in plum sauce versus something that needs to simmer another day or two, if ripeness is even the issue. For some berrying shrubs, a few more days and a few more frosts won't make them tasty. They're bitter and will only be eaten when they're all that's left, and maybe not even then. Or some of the berries might not offer as much fat and calories as the birds are looking for in cold weather. I've read that ivy berries have as much fat as a Mars bar. Now, I don't know what the fat content is in any of our berries, but I do know that the birds can tell the difference. And they always prefer heavy cream to 2%. And here's one more thing I know. This lovely bush took last place in this fall's berry cook-off in our yard. Every fall, the birds pick that season's cook-off winners and losers, voting with their beaks. Voting, voting, voting when cold weather forces them to find lots of fuel. Whichever plant offers the most calories with the least bitterness gets eaten fast. In a 3-day cold snap in early December, they basically denuded all these winterberry bushes. Now, that's a cook-off the plants want to win, because they need birds to help spread their seeds and propagate their species. In fact, some seeds, like junipers, will grow better after they've been through a bird's gut. And it's no coincidence that so many berrying plants tend to sprout near fences and posts or wherever birds commonly perch. So anyway, for reasons unknown, this plant lost in the beautyberry category of the fall cook-off. Except for the crabapple, which didn't get eaten enough to qualify for the contest, every other berrying plant in the yard was denuded. The other 4 winterberries had been stripped by the end of the cold snap. And the robins could have polished off this bush in less than a morning. Easy. Instead, one or another of them would show up several times a day, eat a few berries, and leave to look for seeds, worms, something else. Because about the best you could say for that fruit is it's edible. Every bit as appealing as limp celery. So it's curious that the robins quarreled more over this bush than over any of the others. And robins aren't usually a quarrelsome bunch. When they flock, for instance, they don't have constant hair-trigger dust-ups the way smaller birds do, birds like white-throated sparrows. Robins in flocks dial down the ornery factor. But on this bush, they usually clashed if 2 of them showed up. It's another of those bird-berry mysteries, like why they shunned the chokeberry and why they perched next to crabapples they didn't eat. This final mystery is, why did they stop tolerating each other and start fighting over food they could barely bring themselves to eat? And once in a while, there'd be a full-on humdinger of an ambush. Ornery factor 10 on a scale of 10. It's like they were fighting for the right not to eat those berries. They're torn, with an attitude something like, yeah, it may be limp celery, but it's the only produce in the fridge. So each robin decides it's time to develop sharp elbows. Phooey on flocking, he says, and while I'm at it, cardinals take note. I don't like poachers on my bushes. Because you know that if the robins are not even tolerating their own species, they're also going to make the smaller birds unwelcome. And 9 times out of 10, they'd tolerate whitethroats snacking on a bit of berry. But not so with cardinals, who were seldom suffered to eat in peace. The same pattern developed with the second-to-last bushes in the cook-off, these 2 winterberries. The robins were reluctant to eat those berries themselves, but swift to run the cardinals off. That was unexpectedly polite of him, but it wasn't really all that unusual. He left her alone because sometimes he does that, and other times he doesn't. Just don't expect much tolerance if you're a cardinal and you're on the last berry bush in a robin's yard. You might be interested to know that the leaves of beautyberry bushes make good insect repellent. Rub a little on your clothing and the mosquitoes will find somewhere else to be.